Today we've got questions on the canonization process, wokeism, the Festival of Fools, and what does Charles think of futurism? Welcome to another episode of Off the Menu. I'm your host, Vincent Franchini from Tumblr House, here with a non-flammable Charles Coulombe.
Non-flammable? Are you saying this because I didn't burst into flames over the past week?
That's right.
Thank God. A lot of other things did, though. The fire this time, that's what we saw.
Yeah.
The great apocalypse awaiting the great city since forever. Seemed to, the Palisades and all did it pretty effectively, popped up. That is a once-in-a-lifetime experience I hope we never have to see again.
I'll say.
But we discussed it a great deal during the pre-show, ladies and gentlemen. And it's kind of tough to go back over because, we both lived it. Vinny and his family were evacuated. Mine were left behind, of course. We were left to stick it out as best we could. And we managed, despite everything that happened, despite the days without power, despite the uncertainty, while other members of the company were, safe in the tower, sipping mint juleps and enjoying the airproof, waterproof amenities of the tower. The rest of us just kind of, shuffle along and hope for the best.
Yeah.
Yeah. And speaking of shuffling along and hoping for the best, guess what? Let's see, today is the 18th, Saturday the 19th, the 20th, Monday, when people are going to be seeing this show. Guess what day it is?
Oh, I know. It's Martin Luther King Day.
Well, partly.
It's Inauguration Day.
That too.
What else is it?
Yes. It's King Lee Day. It's the birthdays of Robert E. Lee and Martin Luther King.
Is that what they call it, King Lee Day?
In some places. And the best part is that this year it is also the inauguration, which shows us that we will have a new president who will combine in himself the best elements of the lost cause of the Confederacy and the heroic struggle for civil rights. A man who will bring together the spirit of Jefferson Davis on the one hand and Dr. King on the other.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Go on.
Well, what do you mean, go on?
Is that
enough?
Is
Well, there'll be a figure of reconciliation, bringing together all elements of our nation in our bright, brilliant national pageant.
Beautiful.
Or not. But whatever happens, we are going to have the inauguration, and you will hear bum-ba-da-bum-bum-ba, 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 bum-bum-ba-da-bum, which reminds me, I heard a vicious rumor, and I hope it's a lie. And that is that there won't be an inaugural parade.
I'm not sure. I'm not really into the news a lot, but I heard that the inauguration might be inside. Not sure.
Yeah.
I thought due to weather.
That's what they're saying.
So you like the parade, huh?
Yeah, I'm afraid so. I do like the parade, but it looks like there ain't going to be one. Well, never mind.
Are you going to watch the inauguration? Are you going to watch it? You going to watch it live?
No.
I thought you're patriotic.
I am patriotic.
But you're not going to watch the inauguration.
She's a grand old flag, she's a high-flying flag, and forever in peace may she wave. She's the emblem of the land I love, the home of the free and the brave. Every heart beats true under red, white, and blue, where there's never a boast or brag. But should old acquaintance be forgot, keep your eye on that grand old flag. See?
I stand corrected. You're truly a patriot.
That's right. Darn straight.
So
and you ain't gonna get.
No, go on.
Well, I was just gonna say, you ain't gonna get more patriotism out of anybody than me.
Well, I don't know if we need to do comparisons, Charles. I mean, is that really necessary?
Listen, I'm a Yankee Doodle dandy. A Yankee Doodle do or die. A real live nephew of my Uncle Sam, born on the 4th of July. I've got a Yankee Doodle sweetheart. She's my Yankee Doodle joy. Oh, Yankee Doodle went to London just to ride the ponies. I am that Yankee Doodle boy. I suppose it should be Yankee Doodle went to Sherbrooke just to ride the ponies.
A little heavy to be a jockey.
You haven't seen the Clydesdale, right? He was formerly one of the Bush, Anheuser-Busch Clydesdales, and now I ride him at the track every Saturday and Sunday. The sport of kings and the king of sports. I've never won a race yet, but I always get what they call the E for effort.
The E for effort.
Yeah. And there was even an old verse given a tune by Led Zeppelin that goes, ride a cock horse to Sherburne Cross to see a fat man upon a fat horse.
I know it's
Rings on his finger. What's that?
What song is that from Zeppelin?
It's Fat Man on a Fat Horse.
Okay. I haven't heard that one.
What a pity. What a pity. It's one of my favorites.
Okay.
But Friday was Jackson's birthday. Stonewall's.
Okay.
Then today and tomorrow are normal free days. Although tonight, as I say, we're getting the tonight. I'm sorry, I just blanked. What was I saying? Tomorrow, Monday rather, we have King Lee Day and Inauguration Day.
Well, we still have time until Candlemas. Are you still celebrating a little bit of Christmas? You still feasting over there, even though you're in Austria now?
Let me share you something. Just to let you know that I have not forgotten the truth about life. While I was in our beloved San Gabriel Valley, I went to the Rose Tree Cottage in Pasadena, and for my friends here, bought these 12 Christmas crackers, the big British custom. So we're going to do that before Candlemas. Since I spent the earlier part of the Christmas tide in
Yeah.
I spent the 12 days in the San Gabriel Valley. And on the 12th day of Christmas, my true love gave to me a fire in a cypress tree.
It's quite a twist.
Well, I don't know. Let's twist again like we did last summer. The twist is, I think, an important part of our American musical heritage.
I thought Eisenhower literally said it's like the beginning of the end with the twist. I thought he condemned the twist.
Well, that's another reason to support it then. Let's twist again like we did last summer.
You don't like Ike?
I don't like Ike.
What? How could you say that?
with my mouth, the way I say anything. Why? How do you say things?
Telepathically.
Ooh, that's probably why. It keeps critical responses to a minimum. Nobody blames you for what you're thinking. No,
I thought you
I
like
dislike
Ike.
Ike.
No?
I dislike Ike for a number of reasons.
Go on.
Well, for starters, I think Patton would have been a better president, but he died. I think Senator Robert Taft would have been a better president. But the Eisenhower neocons won out and betrayed our allies, the French, the British, the Hungarians, and so forth. I mean, they made a regular deal of it. I think I had a chance, too, to, shall we say, manage the civil rights revolution in a more constructive manner for the sake of the blacks. But he didn't. So, I mean, not that the two are necessarily causally connected, but it's funny in a sixth sense that the black middle class collapsed just around the time that the civil rights bills were passed under Kennedy and starting under Eisenhower. And why that should be is anyone's guess, but the fact that it happened is a national shame. As great a national shame as Jim Crow itself, in my humble opinion. I believe the collapse of the black family, the black community, the black middle class is as great or greater shame, national shame, than Jim Crow, than segregation.
1950s were a nice, friendly time, though.
In some ways, they were, but there were elements that were bad. Uncle Ike was our American pal, and no one said a word about the Suez Canal.
What is the Suez Canal to me? Well, why does the Suez Canal matter?
Well, not that much since that song came out, obviously. No, that was called the Post-War Blues, and it was 75. It was a very clever song, but anyway, I just think that Ike, he betrayed so many of our allies, and he left such a mess behind him. But it is what it is.
Okay.
Ike is gone. JFK is gone. Nixon is gone.
Joe DiMaggio's gone.
Where did he go?
I don't know. I mean, Simon and Garfunkel asked that very same question.
Well, I don't know either. But a nation turns its lonely eyes to him.
Indeed.
You can come on. You know the words.
No, I don't want to do that. I don't know why I steered it here. That was really stupid of me.
No, I think it was brilliant. Where did you go, Joe DiMaggio? A nation turns its lonely eyes to you. Hoo. What's that you say, Mrs. Robinson? Joltin' Joe has left and gone away. He hated that song because he said it made him sound like he was dead. And now he is. Pop song or prophecy? You be the judge.
Okay. All right, very good, Charles. Anything before we get into the questions? Anything else?
Yes. Being there for a month and coming back here just reminds me of how much I love both our beloved United States of America and our mother continent from whence we sprang. It was a joy being home. It's a joy being here. It's a joy being.
Okay. All right, very good, Charles. I don't know what you're doing. Is that some boomer thing? I don't.
No, I'm in touch with the cosmos.
Oh, so okay, it is okay. Well, can you explain that? I mean, what is that? That's just sort of. I mean, it just looks like
No, I'm just connected with every molecule in creation. That's it.
you bestowing a blessing or something.
And
Some.
receiving it at the same time.
That's typical. All right.
So somebody doesn't like his blessings. Fine, don't count them.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Let us start the questions, and we have a question from Michael who says, "Happy New Year, gentlemen. Hope that you are staying hydrated. I heard it's been rather hot in the area. Know that
Oof.
New Jersey's doors are open for you during these tragic fires. I think Vinny would find the business practice of our state to be very welcoming to his line of work."
I'm sure that's true.
That's very true. I have a question.
Visits to the barons, to the pine barons
I don't do that. I
for
don't do that.
competitors.
My friends do that though. All right. I have a question concerning canonization. It is my
All right.
understanding that once a person is canonized, then we have absolute certainty that someone is in heaven. I also
Yes.
know that the church never has and never will definitively declare someone is in hell. How do we know that just because of the canonization process, which given how quickly after death some people are canonized, that someone is without any doubt in paradise?
Ultimately, the only way we know is through the church certifying miracles attributed to their intercession. That's how we know. You know, it's if the church examines the evidence and says at the end of the day Saint Robert Bellarmine did in fact commit these miracles after his death, there's nothing to be said except accepting it.
So a miracle, so a miracle being attributed to someone de facto means they're in heaven. That
No, but I mean that's the basis upon which we make that judgment. That's why three are required generally for the canonization of saints, and two for the beatification of blesseds.
hmm. Okay. Um, what's the canonization process like now? Do you know? I mean, obviously, we know of the abolishment of the devil's advocate, which a lot of people are sort of unhappy about because it sort of opens up the door to questions. But how
Yeah.
thorough is the canonization process now? I mean, I think a lot of people have questions about that, whether it's flimsy now, whether some people sort of get in easily. Do you have any information on
I
that?
Yeah, I would disagree with that. I would say that I mean it's certainly less rigorous than it was, which I think is a pity, frankly. But ultimately, it always goes back to those miracles. You know, now living living as and when and how we all do, you have the means of finding out about almost anything immediately. You could look up all of the saints committed by all the saints, all of the miracles committed by the saints in pursuit of their canonization as they've been canonized over the past 30 years. And one would be bad enough, but taken together as a huge mob, it's inescapable. This is still the age of miracles, and they center around the Catholic Church. I can understand why someone might not like that, but one word comes to mind: tough.
So let's say, so does the miracle have to occur after that beatified person has died?
No.
No. So wouldn't a miracle? Now, me just playing devil's advocate here. If a miracle happened to a person while they're living, doesn't that simply mean they are justified at that moment in time?
Yes, quite possibly. The miracles are all posthumous. They happen after the dead person died.
No, I'm talking about like a miracle worker. Like that someone works a miracle.
Most of them don't last that long, and those that do generally have very circumscribed lives.
Hmm. Okay. All right. Anything else to add on the canonization process, Charles?
Well, no, just that, I mean, well, on the one hand, I understand why people have not liked its simplification, uh, as with so much else today. But by the same token, I would say that just as all the changes of the Mass do not banish our Lord from it, although it can appear that way, um, so, so too with so too with the miraculous and with the canonizations.
Well, let me ask you one more question. Let's sort of flip this around. If you could reform anything about the canonization process, would you?
Oh yeah, yeah, but not because I think it would mean anything intrinsically, simply because I think it would reinforce people's faith in the system. So I'd restore the devil's advocate. I'd restore making sure there were children for not children for communion. No, I would make sure that there was still a great deal of information provided about the saint and solicitation for his intercession. And I would revive the devil's advocate because his job was to prove the person was not a saint. And when the person was, if the person was canonized, the devil's advocate would do penance at the new saint's shrine in Rome.
Yeah, that's interesting. My wife and I received a third class relic from a prominent mutual friend of ours who's Hungarian.
Oh boy,
And the
Jasha Gabor.
not quite close, but not quite. Um, no,
So you're not in touch with Jasha anymore.
no, not anymore.
Okay.
But
Sure.
the relic, it was interesting because I'd never seen this before. So the
Bela Lugosi.
uh, not quite, Charles, not quite, but yeah, okay. So the relic was of Cardinal Minzenti.
Oh.
And so what was interesting about the gift and the relic is it was encouraging uh, using the person asking for help from that person in order to sort of, I guess you could say, solicit a miracle
Yeah.
and be a part of that canonization process. What do you think about that?
No, I mean, it's always been that way. People, you've got to bear in mind that causes of saints start with groups, usually of laymen, and sometimes a layman and a priest, who are very excited about the possibility that so and so lying in the cemetery here is actually a saint. And they may
Hmm.
have had a reputation for holiness, etc. But what happens is that a local cultus develops, then the diocese brings the attention to Rome's ears. Rome investigates, and if they think that there's sufficient to justify it, they begin the whole process first of declaring the individual venerable, which requires their life to be examined carefully, and a history basically written about it. And then in days gone by, the devil's advocate would attempt to use it to explode the person's sainthood. But if, after the whole biographical process, they come up with no objections, then the servant of God, which is what you are when your cause is initially introduced, becomes a venerable. That's when you really start praying, for the intercessions. Because with one, the venerable will become a blessed, and with two more, the blessed will become a saint.
Okay, very good. Um, All right. John has a really good question. He says, "What led to the decolonization of Africa?"
Two words: United States.
Good things, I suppose.
No. Although it wasn't just us, the Soviets had their part to do with it. Don't want to leave our brothers in our brothers in dominance over our European friends out of the picture. You see, Roosevelt, uh, Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Truman, and Dwight D. Eisenhower all had the same idea of pushing America's European allies out of their colonial territories in Africa and elsewhere. And we made that very clearly 100 ways from Sunday. It's also one of the things that pushed the Balkan revolutions, because you claim to be the center of heaven on earth, the center of liberty on earth, and yet your blacks are living under Jim Crow. So uh, the civil rights program was encouraged by this new orientation uh, in American dominance. Uh, Through Europe and our allies, we hoped we would be able to defeat countries or not defeat, but basically take over countries which had never been under us. And we were competing with the Soviet Union for each of these quote unquote third world countries. Uh, but in every case, our European allies were driven out and we, with our Soviet Confederates, would dictate a peace of some kind. And the result was a continent full of irrelevant and nasty governments that were much better at oppressing the people than serving them.
Why did we do that? What was our interest in doing that?
Partly economic, since I think we thought that if the colonial countries were dumped out of their respective countries, that we would get more through trade in Egypt and Sudan and so on, and in Europe, sorry, in Africa in general. But none of that ever came to real fruition. It was just the opposite. We messed things up without really accomplishing anything. And decolonization in Africa has meant a collection of dictatorships, uh, dictatorships, genocide, and all sorts of other unpleasant things.
I'm confused by the logic there. So we thought decolonization was good because it would encourage more trade?
Yeah.
I thought the purpose
But
of colonization was to sort of increase trade.
well, it is, and the idea was that they would trade with us rather than or more than their old partners.
Huh. Okay. That was an interesting three presidents you named, because you jumped over various presidents, and that spanned a good bit of time there.
Well, there's a good bit of time, but in this area, their policies are all remarkably similar. I mean, in 1958, the Belgian government, which at the time ruled the Congo, made a survey of how rapidly they would have to bring in Congolese talent if the country were ever to run itself. Well, what they found in 1958 was that at the speed uh, in which the Congolese were working and being trained to become civil servants and so on, there would be enough of them to run the country by the year 2000. In 1959, there were riots, and then the colonials pulled out in 1961. And the result was horrific.
I remember from one of the things I learned, I think, from Star Spangled Crown, from reading Star Spangled
Yeah,
Crown, was sort of the intimate connection that the United States had with Liberia.
good.
Could you talk about that a little bit?
No, sure. I mean, basically, Liberia was founded as a place where American slaveholders could dump their slaves back in Africa without having to figure out where they were. And that's what we did. And these people, the Americo-Liberians, as they were called, were, well, they were Americans, really. They were mostly black in terms of ethnicity, but they were Americans. And so they immediately set up shop, began building plantations, and conquered all the local tribes, so that Liberia became an Americo-Liberian, as the descendants of the American settlers were called. It became an Americo-Liberian colony, as it were, not directly ruled by the United States, but nevertheless still heavily influenced by the U.S., because the Americo-Liberians were. And they had about as much regard for the tribal Africans as their cousins were getting during Jim Crow.
Hmm. All right, thank you for that. We have a couple questions from Jared.
All right.
His first question, he says, we are obviously in the midst of a great cultural shift with the rise of wokeism. The rise of wokeism seems extreme, but how does this compare to the cultural shift of the late 60s to early 70s? Movies, for example, went from no swear words or nudity to F-bombs and gratuitous nudity in just the span of a few years. And similar drastic changes occurred in music, fashion, etc. I was not alive during that time, but it seems to me that the cultural shift of the late 60s to 70s was much more extreme than anything wokeism has produced. How is the culture shift seen with the rise of wokeism similar and different to the cultural upheaval of the late 60s and 70s? Thank you.
Well, I think it's a good question. I think that, for one thing, there's a great deal of perspective involved here. I mean, you're used, if you've lived here for 15 years, uh, let's say the family last year was 1905. Well, you've got to bear in mind that the whole uh, framework, the whole structure of public opinion shifted very rapidly on a foundation, however, that had been built during the counterculture. So take an example, now if you say anything's wrong with gay marriage, you're a bigot and an evil person. In 2015, when gay marriage came into the States, you were still a bigot, but you weren't so much of a hater because people were still allowed to show a certain amount of disgust with sodomy. You got back to when my mother was alive, or rather when she died. Uh, the very idea of gay marriage was, nobody was talking about it. Nobody thought about it. And so it went all the way back until in the 60s. The idea of a policeman allowing a couple of guys to go walking down the street clutching each other's hands, it would never have flown. It would never have flown at all. So I agree that the past 10 years have shown a real rapid alteration in cultural mores. But though that rapid change would not have been possible had it not been for the change in businessmen,
Hmm.
had it not been for the change in society as a whole.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, we're comparing, I think, basically a revolution with sort of a
It's
subsequent
natural
shift
results.
of that revolution, of that initial revolution. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, yeah, I think it's fair to say. I mean, things started out one way, they began to turn in another, and then within a couple of decades, it was the total opposite.
Yeah, I mean, you've said this in different ways where everyone used to um, have that sort of same. I forgot how you would say it, but it was this the same basic
The
moral
common,
fiber.
yeah, common
Everybody sort of
culture.
agree. There's a common culture there. There's more of an agreement to the common good, and that was sort of a glue for the culture.
Yeah, yeah,
And then that was basically ripped apart.
it was, and that glue. I mean, that 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 binding piece of America's history came to us from the Puritans ultimately, but it worked as a much wider social binding because virtually every religious group California, believed that the same things were right and wrong, and that was how they managed.
Hmm.
It took the place of having a common king or a common government.
Do you think wokeism is coming to an end? I feel like we've turned a corner, and I feel like, I mean, when you see liberal people, or I mean, perhaps more liberal people, like for example, Bill Maher, right? Like Maher is while he's liberal, he's making fun of wokeism pretty consistently now, which
Which was not the case with them before.
right. So is that indicative of anything?
On a local level, sure. I mean, I do think that, you know, in a certain sense, this is as far as we can go. There's nowhere to go but up. You
You,
know, it,
Charles Coulombe saying we've hit rock bottom.
yeah, okay. But
Yes.
you gotta be, I would, but you gotta be careful because that can only shift further down.
Well then you're not really saying. So what exactly are you saying?
We won't know that we've hit rock bottom until there really is nowhere else to go but up. Um, as I say, in 1967, when my dad's generation were going crazy over the war in Woodstock and everything else, we simply could not have conceived of gay marriage. All right, that was simply not on the menu. Uh, Living together, shacking up, was a big revolution. But it too was made possible by the spread of contraception and abortion. Now, you get to the sort of thing where in 1965, you've got a kind of a rigid, not rigid, but a kind of a structured moral sense. Within 10 years, it's blown apart. But what has happened? Well, abortion and birth control are fine. Shacking up with a chick is fine. But gay marriage isn't. For most people, gaiety is not. That doesn't come until later. Uh, Euthanasia wasn't thought of at all back then. It is now. Um, all of these alterations could only come about after the earlier ones came about. But when they came about, initially the reaction was, all right, this far, no further. But of course, in time, people were willing to go further, and there was no reason for them not to. Because ultimately, the same reason why you can't dictate a person's choice of marriage in a heterosexual union, ultimately there's no way you can stop it in a homosexual union. Ultimately, there's no way you can stop polygamy. You know, you just can't do it. So our current decay very much owes its immediate future to the I mean its immediate uh, uh, status to the combination of things that brought us here from the 1960s. And you see, it wasn't only in one area because standards of dress, manners, everything was affected. Uh, you know, the whole tendency toward unisex clothing. Um, Now, men and women still wear different clothes when it comes to more or less formal wear, but the more casual one's appearance, the more unisex it is. That's not by magic. That happened as part of a logical conclusion of going down that road. And from this, you get women in combat. You know, for this idea that combat isn't about fighting and dying; it's about opportunity of career. And then the important thing on your medal, or on your badge rather, is becomes not your specialty but your rank. You know, and if having a woman uh, fighting with hand-to-hand weapons and tossing grenades is essential to her getting a given rank, well, then it's essential. Now, the fact that it may not help the mission at all, that it may detract in 100 different ways for the effectiveness of the mission, that we forget about, as long as everyone has a chance to play.
Hmm. All right. Moving on. Jared has another question. He says, "May Charles please discuss the medieval Festival of Fools celebrated by the clergy during the Christmas season? What's that all about?"
Well, that's a good question. The Feast of All Fools was a day when the general rules were reversed. Now, in some places, it began with Holy Innocents' Day, where the children, say, of a attached to a convent or whatever, would take over the singing of the hours and everything. Uh, but
Children attached to a
uh,
convent?
I'm sorry.
What did you say? Did you say children attached to a convent?
Yeah, I mean boys who sing, for instance, in a convent or monastery choir. Uh, but the this is a very good opening explanation. It says the Feast of Fools or Festival of Fools was the feast day on January 1st celebrated by the clergy in Europe during the Middle Ages, initially in southern France, but later more widely. During the feast, participants would elect either a false bishop, false archbishop, or false pope, and they would do that in the Feast of the Holy Innocents, actually. And then it talks about the different examples of it, how it changed, and how people dealt with it time-wise and everything else. But every ecclesiastical establishment had a number of boys singing in the choir. And so on Holy Innocents' Day, to commemorate this, to commemorate this, they'd reverse the order of things, and so a choir boy would take the place of the bishop or the abbot or the chairman of the chapter of canons, and basically the whole thing would be kind of a send up of normal times. And they had a particular religious sense for doing it. As time went on, the wild pranks and strange rhymes, almost blasphemous, some of them in nature, were replaced with games, that kind of thing. And then eventually it died out.
So, I mean, what's your commentary on this?
Well, my commentary is that, as is always the case, at a time when the vast majority of people in holy orders and people outside of holy orders, took the liturgy of the Mass very seriously, there was one day a year when it was burlesqued, when it was made a bit of a joke. Mind you, that didn't affect to bring our Lord down on the altar. They didn't make fun of that. But it was a time when the rules no longer applied, which in some places had been the case throughout Christmas. A place where people dressed up as their elders or their youngers or as women or whatever. They reversed the order of things, you say. And that was really simply a way of blasting off steam and having a good time before the beginning of the year.
Okay. So you thought that was a good thing?
It worked at the time. I mean, now it would probably be terribly cheapened like Halloween.
Okay. One last question. This one is from Pierre, who says, "What does Charles think of futurism, specifically the thought of Marinetti?"
Well, I haven't studied futurism too deeply, but I will say that futurists, the movement was centered in Italy, particularly after World War One, and it played, although all futurists weren't fascists by any stretch, it played an important role. His thought did. Skinetti's, did you say?
Marinetti.
Marinetti's thought played a very, very important role both inside and outside fascism. And inside fascism, Futurism was responsible for a lot of the artistry and the literature, and especially the architecture. So it was very forward-looking, very Art Deco.
So it was an Italian movement in art and literature catalyzed by a 1909 manifesto published in a newspaper by Italian poet F.T. Marinetti. Okay. Yeah. So this looks fairly, looking at some of these futuristic things, at least this painting that they show on Wikipedia, is a little bit reminiscent of Picasso, I guess you could say. That's interesting. What do you think of futurism as an art form? Do you have any familiarity with it? It looks like the beginning of modern art. It looks like it's more of a study in artistic elements, rather than a study on life, it seems.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's let's put it this way. The door to futurism, as in so many other things, is opened by the ruin of Europe in World War One. How do we get out of that? How do we put ourselves back together? And for the futurists, it's breaking with the decayed past and blazing a new road to the future.
I see. Okay. Well, we have exhausted the questions. Do you have any final words, Charles?
Several. On Monday, as we celebrate King Lee Day, both the Confederacy and the Civil Rights Movement, we should also bear in mind that Mr. Trump is coming into a country as divided as it was then, if not as trigger happy. Wish him luck. I really can only ask one question after that, and that is, what is it if it's Monday?
It's off the menu.
And the soul you save?
It may be your own. See you next time, everyone.
Be good. Bye bye.